The old farmhouse stood at the edge of town, where the roads were more dirt than pavement, and the trees crowded close like ancient sentinels. It was here that Samuel Collins had lived most of his life. As he sat alone in the dusty kitchen, the wind howling through the cracked window panes, he could feel the weight of the years pressing down on him. Life had passed him by, leaving him a lonely man with little more than memories. And one memory in particular had begun to creep back into his mind more frequently, filling the empty silence of his home with a haunting presence. Her name was Eliza. Once she had been his everything. Samuel had met her when he was young, foolish, and full of dreams. She was beautiful, with hair as dark as a moonless night, and eyes that gleamed with something otherworldly. The townsfolk had whispered about her, said she lived alone in the woods, said she had strange powers, unnatural abilities. Some called her a witch, but Samuel didn't care. He was drawn to her like a moth to a flame, captivated by her beauty, her mystery, her undeniable power. For a time they were in love, or at least it felt like love. They would meet in secret, under the cover of darkness, away from the prying eyes of the town. She told him things, showed him wonders, lights in the sky, whispers in the wind, things that no ordinary woman could do. And he loved her for it, for all of it, for everything she was. But then, like all things, it began to unravel. Samuel's family pressured him to settle down, to marry someone normal, someone respectable. And there were rumors, whispers that Eliza wasn't just different but dangerous. Some claimed she could curse people, that she had a dark side, and that her love came at a terrible cost. And so one night, with a heavy heart, Samuel ended it. He told her he couldn't be with her, couldn't be associated with her, couldn't risk everything for a love he didn't fully understand. She didn't cry, she didn't beg. She simply stared at him with those deep, dark eyes and said, "You'll regret this, Samuel. You'll never be free of me. Not in this life, not in the next." He left her that night, thinking he had made the right choice, convinced that life would go on and that eventually he would forget her. He did marry Sarah, a kind woman who loved him despite his distant heart. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl, but even in the years that followed, something lingered. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had left part of himself behind in those woods with Eliza, and then Sarah died. She was gone in the blink of an eye, a fever that took her before he could even realize what was happening. His children grew distant, leaving the old farmhouse to start their own lives, and Samuel was left alone, with nothing but the creaking house and the memories of a love he had tried to bury. It was a few weeks after Sarah's death that the strange things began to happen. At first, it was small. A cold breeze in the room when there was no window open, the feeling of being watched when he was alone. He dismissed it as his mind playing tricks on him, the grief twisting his thoughts. But then the dreams started. Night after night, he would dream of Eliza, standing at the edge of the woods, her dark eyes fixed on him, her lips moving but no sound coming out. Each night she got closer, her face pale and gaunt, her fingers long and twisted like the branches of a dying tree. One night, she was close enough to touch him. He could feel her cold fingers brush against his skin, and he woke with a start, his heart racing, drenched in sweat. The next morning, he found something on his pillow, a long strand of black hair just like Eliza's. That's when he knew she was back. It started slowly at first, just a presence, a shadow moving at the corner of his vision, a faint whisper of his name on the wind. But soon, it became more. Every night, he would hear her voice calling to him, soft and sweet, like she used to when they met in secret. "Samuel?" Her voice echoed through the house, no matter where he went. It came from the walls, the floorboards, even the air itself. And the shadows, they seemed to move of their own accord, stretching across the floor like blackened hands reaching for him. One evening, as he sat by the fire, trying to calm his nerves with a glass of whiskey, he felt the temperature in the room drop suddenly. The fire flickered and then went out, plunging the room into darkness. For a moment, everything was silent, and then he heard it. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the hallway. His heart pounded in his chest as the footsteps grew closer, stopping just outside the room. He didn't want to turn around. He didn't want to see her. But he knew she was there. He could feel her presence, cold and suffocating, standing just behind him. "Samuel." Her voice was a whisper now, so close he could feel her breath on the back of his neck. "You left me, but I never left you." He spun around, the chair scraping against the floor, but the room was empty. The door to the hallway was open, and beyond it, the darkness stretched into the house like a gaping maw. He could hear her breathing, soft and steady, but there was no one there. From that night on, she was with him constantly. He could feel her presence even during the day, the cold weight of her gaze always on him. Doors would creak open on their own, and objects would move, as if unseen hands were shifting them. His nights were the worst, filled with dreams of her face, pale, hollow, her eyes filled with an eternal sorrow. One night, unable to take it any longer, Samuel decided to confront her. He lit every candle in the house, filling the rooms with a flickering light, and sat in the middle of the living room, waiting for her. Hours passed, the shadows dancing on the walls, and just when he thought she wouldn't come, the temperature dropped again. The candles flickered, then went out, one by one, until only a single flame remained. In the dim light, Samuel saw her, standing in the corner of the room, her figure barely visible in the darkness. Her hair hung in limp black strands around her face, her eyes sunken and hollow. "Eliza," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Why are you here? What do you want?" She stepped forward, her feet barely making a sound on the old wooden floor. "You left me," she said, her voice soft but filled with anger. "You broke my heart, and now I've come to break yours." "I didn't mean to," Samuel said, his throat dry. "I thought I was doing the right thing." Her eyes flashed, and the room seemed to grow darker, the shadows pulling in around her. "The right thing?" she hissed. "You were a coward, Samuel. You were afraid of what you didn't understand, and you ran. You left me to die." Samuel felt tears welling up in his eyes. "I didn't know what to do. I was young and I was scared." Eliza's face softened for a moment, but only for a moment. "It doesn't matter now," she said. "I've waited too long, and now I've come to claim what's mine." The shadows in the room seemed to shift and twist, moving toward Samuel like living creatures. He tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't obey. The cold seeped into his bones, and he could feel her presence wrapping around him, tightening like a noose. "Eliza, please," he begged, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." She knelt beside him, her face inches from his, her breath cold against his skin. "It's too late for apologies, Samuel," she whispered. "You'll never be free of me. Not in this life, not in the next, not in—" Her hand reached out, cold fingers brushing against his cheek. Samuel felt his heart stutter, the cold spreading through his chest. His vision blurred, and the last thing he saw was her face, twisted with anger and sorrow, before everything went dark. The next morning, the neighbors found Samuel's body slumped in his chair, his face pale and frozen in a mask of terror. The house was cold, colder than it should have been, and the shadows seemed to linger a little longer than usual. No one spoke of Eliza anymore, though the old tales of the witch who had once lived in the woods still circulated in whispers. Some said she had cursed the town, that her spirit still roamed the woods, searching for the man who had betrayed her. Others claimed to have seen her, standing at the edge of the trees, watching, waiting. And those who lived near Samuel's old farmhouse swore that on certain nights, when the wind howled just right, they could hear her voice, soft and sweet, calling out to the man she had once loved. And in the shadows, they said, you could still see her, waiting for him.